Okay. I see more people coming in, so let's start. Hello and welcome to why VantageScore 4.0 outperforms Classic FICO. That's what you see on the slide there. I'm Dan Carell, and the VantageScore team and I are so pleased to have you with us today. This topic, our topic today, is pressing for at least two reasons. First, there are changes afoot in the mortgage market, as I'm sure you all know, bringing VantageScore models into the system. And second, the market is under pressure with consumers missing more payments, taking out fewer consumer loans. VantageScore CEO Silvio Tavares was recently on CNBC talking about what the VantageScore team sees in terms of consumer behavior right now. It's a challenging situation. In the time that we have today, we're going to cover four things, and we'll jump to the agenda slide here to look at those four. First, I'm just going to briefly introduce our expert, Ben Lieberman. More on that in a minute, and you can see Ben's with us. Then Ben is going to take us right into a really fascinating analysis of how VantageScore 4.0 outperforms Classic FICO. He's also going to show us a proposed score mapping, so you can just see clearly how VantageScore 4.0 scores correlate with the scores that you might be used to in Classic FICO. And then the call to action, what do you need to do as a practical matter to benefit from the changes that are coming? We're going to leave time for questions. And if you have questions during the session, as you think of them, please just use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, not the chat thing, but the Q&A button. And we will share the deck with you afterwards. And we're very happy to answer any questions after the session that maybe we didn't get to, or even if you send them to us afterwards. So with that, let me introduce Ben. Ben is one of VantageScore's data scientists. He has both studied and taught statistics, and Ben has applied statistical techniques at Freddie Mac and now at VantageScore. His CV is long. It involves words like non-parametric statistics and stochastic processes. I think that tells us what we need to know about his background. He now is using AI and machine learning to just provide the deepest possible understanding of how credit scoring works in the mortgage market. And today he's leading us through his analysis of how the VantageScore 4.0 model performs in comparison with Classic FICO. I've had a sneak peek at the deck and some of the related work. I'm excited to hear from Ben. And so, Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us away.
Thank you, Dan, for the intro. I should have you follow me around everywhere I go. That was very
There we
nice.
go. I'll be your hype team.
Thank you. Yeah, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. There's been a lot of noise about VantageScore 4.0's effectiveness since the FHFA announcement. Much of it has been confusing, both to us and to stakeholders, and has raised a lot of questions and opportunity for further work. So we've put out some resources. The white paper, which we'll be discussing today, is out. You can find it on our website, on LinkedIn, anywhere you look, you will probably find it. As well as a blog post that came out last week on our website, just fact checking some of the more recent work and claims that have come out about VantageScore 4.0's performance in mortgage. So, as the title says, and as Dan introduced, this presentation is a fact check. We'll walk through the data on VantageScore 4.0's performance versus Classic FICO, showing clear evidence of stronger performance, more accurate risk separation, and safer expansion. So let's start with the evidence. So some three key takeaways I want to hit. VantageScore 4.0 uses a richer data set, which allows us to do three things better than Classic FICO on the Fannie Mae data set. These things matter to lenders, regulators, and consumers. So, reduces defaults during stress. VantageScore 4.0 flags significantly more high-risk loans before the pandemic, reducing defaults during stress. Makes more accurate predictions. VantageScore 4.0 identifies up to 13.3% more defaults and delivers up to 3.8% predictive lift, and expands responsible access. VantageScore 4.0 qualifies borrowers with lower default rates while safely expanding the Superprime tier. These findings come from the single-family loan performance data set from Fannie Mae, which spans from 2013 April to 2023 April, so a decade of performance. Each loan was scored with VantageScore 4 tri-merge and using the average Classic FICO at origination. And our bad performance is the industry standard, ever reaching 90 days delinquent within 24 months. And one note I like to make, just to level set everybody, VantageScore 4.0 incorporates trended data, which will help pick up on behavioral patterns that Classic FICO misses. There's more on that later, but one note just to make, trended data was available from TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian since 2016, and the history goes back on the oldest trade line to 2009. Because that date ends in 2009, a question we get a lot is why can't we see VantageScore 4.0 performance during the Great Financial Crisis? And it's because the data elements used were not available pre-2009. So just so everybody knows. Additionally, the findings I'm presenting today aren't just ours, they're shared by others. Research arms at Bloomberg Intelligence, JP Morgan Chase, KBRA, and Bank of America, just to name a few, have all said the same thing. So let's dive into point one and focus on the stressed environment. I'd like to level set one more time just about the format of the slide now, not about what metrics we're looking at. So the metrics we're going to be talking about, the actual performance metrics, are defaults captured, which I will try not to, but may accidentally switch back to verbiage from the white paper that I wrote, where it was called bottom decile lift. I'll try my best to stick to what's on the slide. It helps determine if the score is better at concentrating the riskiest borrowers where you would expect them to be, at the bottom of the score range, specifically in the bottom 10% of scores. And Gini is a way to measure how well a credit score can separate performing loans from delinquent loans. It tells you if you're ranking borrowers in the right order of risk. So for this slide specifically, how do we capture the COVID population? The population we're looking at is 2019 originations with a Classic FICO score less than 720. The reason we picked 720 is because FICO defines their Superprime range as 720 to 850. So we're looking at prime, near prime, and subprime consumers. We were curious at the performance of consumers who might not perform well under stress, another motivation for this population. And the third reason was some hindsight. We know that Fannie Mae reported in August of 2020 that their delinquencies spiked their serious delinquency rate spiked to 3.3%, the highest during the pandemic. So it's our highest time period for COVID defaults and the best way to kind of zoom into that population. So VantageScore 4 delivered 11.1% increase in defaults captured with a 48.5% increase in Gini lift, meaning VantageScore 4 flagged significantly more high-risk loans heading into the pandemic. And on the same population, but rather than on the single-family loan level population, they used the single-family mortgage-backed securities population, also provided by Fannie Mae. Bloomberg Intelligence noted there was a 15% higher success rate at predicting defaulters. Again, this is the 2019 originations ahead of the pandemic. Had VantageScore 4 been in place, many of those loans would have been flagged earlier. That is why we say VantageScore 4 reduces defaults during stress. It gives lenders time to act, to mitigate losses, and to manage servicing pipelines. But as we all know, performance during stress periods, while it's essential, hopefully doesn't make up the majority of the time we live in. So we need to make sure that we can perform across different credit cycles. So the next slide, we look at a stable and distressed environment to test VantageScore 4 performance. So we split the population into two vintages, what we call pre-pandemic, which is originations before 2020, and post-pandemic, which is originations after 2020. For the pre-COVID vintages, the two bars on the left, VantageScore 4 shows a 9.1% increase in defaults captured and a 3.6% increase in predictive lift. For post-COVID originations, a 7.5% increase in default captured, and Gini narrowed slightly, but still a 0.5% performance lift. This shows that the strength is not situational. VantageScore 4 delivers enhanced accuracy regardless of the credit cycle in stressed and stable environments. A consistent edge across the cycles builds confidence that the model won't break down when conditions change. So, okay, we can zoom into COVID. We can break the population into two. How does VantageScore 4 perform versus Classic FICO on the entire data set? After all, we have access to the whole data set. So, over a decade of mortgage performance, VantageScore 4 consistently outperforms Classic FICO across all borrower structures. We're looking at three categories of borrowers from left to right. We have single borrowers, primary borrowers, and multiple borrowers. For multiple borrowers, we're using the average score. The results are robust. You could pick median, but we felt that presenting the average score was the most intuitive and approachable. So for single borrowers, VantageScore 4 identifies 13.3% more defaults and delivers 3.8% lift in Gini. For primary borrowers, that number shrinks a little bit to 11.2% more defaults and 3.5% Gini lift. And even across multiple borrowers, VantageScore 4 still outperforms with 9% more defaults captured and a nearly 2% lift in Gini. This shows that VantageScore 4's advantage isn't tied to one ownership structure. It's universal. Whether you're underwriting a single applicant, which we know is a higher risk proposition, focusing on the primary borrower, or averaging across multiple borrowers, VantageScore 4 sharpens risk separation. So these may look like modest lifts and percentages, although I think double-digit and near double-digit lifts are not modest. But if you want to say 2 to 4% is modest, let's put it into some context. Applied to trillions in unpaid principal balance across a decade of mortgages, this translates to billions of dollars in avoided losses. Remember, Gini lift, the smaller number, 2 to 4%, reflects the overall ranking power. So it is material. The default captured metric tells us VS4, VantageScore 4 consistently places more of the riskiest loans in the lowest score bucket, giving lenders better foresight and confidence in how VantageScore 4 separates risk. After all, a lender is in control of their credit box. So not just meeting the GSE lowest score eligibility of 620 doesn't mean they're going to approve. These lowest score consumers who have the highest risk, identified by defaults captured, isolates these exact consumers you should be wary about. The consistency also reinforces that VantageScore 4 isn't cherry picking. It improves risk stratification across all borrower configurations. So this is what I consider the broader evidence. Let's turn to how VantageScore 4 reshapes the borrower distribution and expands access responsibly. So we're looking at four categories here on the right-hand side of the slide, from left to right: subprime, near prime, prime, and superprime, using the VantageScore credit tiering. I want to start with the right-hand side. I want to focus on superprime. So under VantageScore 4, in the orange bar, Classic FICO in blue, 51% of borrowers are superprime, compared to 37% under Classic FICO. These 14% of borrowers basically come from the prime category, where you can see Classic FICO is putting 14% more borrowers into prime than VantageScore 4. The near prime proportions are about the same, but subprime is negligible. Considering this is mortgage, we basically exclude scores below 620. The small percentage of the population with scores below, in the 300 to 600 range from co-borrowers or borrowers who need a co-borrower to qualify, right? So not surprising, there's a little bit there. Another way to compare the models is to ask, how do borrowers perform who would not have qualified under one model, but do qualify under another? The easiest cutoff to look at is looking at eligibility at the 620 cutoff. Borrowers qualifying under VantageScore 4, but not under Classic FICO, default at 6.5%, versus the opposite, those who qualify under Classic FICO, but not VantageScore 4, default at 10.1%. So a clear difference there. You might say, well, since these are all funded loans, the 620 score cutoff is kind of a silly threshold to look at, right? Because you've already met the minimum GSE eligibility. The same pattern does hold if you look at 640, 660, 680, 700. You get the gist. And just for reference, you can compute the numbers yourself, but at 680, that difference, you still swap out 1.5% of the risk. So the default rate under VantageScore 4 at the 680 cutoff is 1.5% lower than that for Classic FICO. So I like to think that because we collect and analyze more data about each borrower, we can arrive at this conclusion. VantageScore 4 uses a more robust set of data that can give you a higher resolution picture of each borrower. It allows us to zoom in to get even better results. If you look at the score distribution alone, it's where many of the critiques of VantageScore 4 come from. They focus on score inflation, painting with broad strokes, saying that everybody's going to get a higher score, so it's a worse and less predictive model. As you have seen, scores are higher, no doubt there, but the question isn't how high or low scores are, but whether you have the right people scored at each level. Because VantageScore 4 uses more data, some borrower scores are indeed higher, and VantageScore 4 is also more predictive, as we've seen in previous slides. To me, that's not inflation, it's smarter classification. This matters because VantageScore 4 doesn't expand access by loosening standards. It uses better data, trended data, rental, utilities, and telecom to reclassify borrowers more accurately. It's safer access expansion. More consumers benefit without lenders taking on additional risk, as we've seen by the swap set analysis on the left. As VantageScore 4 uses this richer, higher quality data, we can gather more insight and draw more distinction amongst the borrowers. This allows us to, in comparison to Classic FICO, see a noticeably different score distribution. And at the end of the day, as a consumer first, right, that's who I am, and then I work at VantageScore second, I would like to be rewarded for my repayment activity, right? I would like to be in the Superprime tier if my repayment activity would indicate that. So it's a positive for borrowers as well. Investors need to get an intuitive feel for how VantageScore 4 maps to Classic FICO, right? How are the scores different, and how does this translate to risk and performance? These slides that I'm about to show right here, talking about the mapping between Classic FICO and VantageScore 4, should help bridge that gap a little bit. So on the left-hand side of the table, I provided a couple different cutoffs and the significance associated with them. In the middle, the associated Classic FICO score, and the right-hand side, the equivalent VantageScore 4 score. So at the GSE eligibility of 620, the equivalent VantageScore 4, based on the risk equivalent, the default probability, is 643. At the VantageScore Prime tier cutoff, 661 for a Classic FICO would be 668 under VantageScore 4. So that distribution narrows. At what I consider, and also what last month's credit gauge considers, roughly the average credit score of 700, the equivalent VantageScore 4 score is 704. And then where we see the distributions shift slightly based on results from the previous slide, Classic FICO score of 781 would translate to an equivalent VantageScore 4 score of 800. So it can give a sense of equivalency based on default probability, just to get a more intuitive feeling of how Classic FICO maps to VantageScore 4. But we all know the elephant in the room is we're waiting on a mapping here. We're waiting on the LLPA grids. They are forthcoming, and we are eagerly awaiting their arrival. This exercise should hopefully provide a little bit of comfort. And as discussed in further detail in the white paper, the methodology can be refined slightly, but there are trade-offs when you make that distinction. One other thing to mention is that we should be getting a little more intuition for these scores, both with the LLPA grids and something that Fannie Mae announced today. In November, alongside the mortgage-backed security disclosures, VantageScore 4.0 scores will be included in those disclosures. So you'll have an idea alongside the securities what the VantageScore 4 score is and see how it relates to Classic FICO as well. So you'll get more intuition. The scores are different, and I've mentioned why, and I've mentioned how the performance of VantageScore 4, while a different scoring methodology than Classic FICO, actually performs better, right? I want to dig a little bit into the differentiators before I close. So VantageScore 4 uses more modeling techniques and is tri-merged by design. The differentiators in the data are trended data and alternative data, rent, utilities, and telecom. We authored a white paper before my time at VantageScore on alternative data in 2021, which discusses how predictive and helpful these new data elements can be for your VantageScore 4 score. That can be found on our website. Additionally, from a report that came out from TransUnion last week, we know that more consumers are reporting rent to their credit file. In fact, there was an 18% year-over-year lift in voluntary self-reporting of rent. We expect, and the FHFA and all general news tends to expect, these numbers will increase as VantageScore 4 includes rental history. We also have some very encouraging work coming out shortly about rental data and your VantageScore 4 score. So I advise you to keep your eyes open, your ears open, and expect something coming soon. So Classic FICO uses less data, and less data creates clustering, less separation in the score distribution. We saw it on the previous slide with almost 60% of consumers concentrated in the prime tier under Classic FICO. FICO's argument for requiring 6 months of data is to quote that you can't generate a line from one data point. However, trended data gives you rich insights up to 24 months of payment activity per trade line for a borrower. This is massively powerful data that is used in VantageScore 4 and not in Classic FICO. By incorporating these rental data and alternative trade lines, people who were previously credit invisible can become seen under VantageScore 4. It both improves predictive power and makes more consumers scoreable, including underserved groups who are invisible under FICO's rigid file requirements. We estimate that number to be 5 million mortgage-ready Americans. So, what does this mean for you? What's our call to action? 3 main points. Proven performance. VantageScore 4 consistently outperforms Classic FICO across cycles, including during the pandemic. It expands safe mortgage access by qualifying more borrowers at lower default risk. Smarter access. And ready for today, VantageScore 4 provides a modern, data-driven model aligned with lenders' needs for accuracy and resilience. This isn't theoretical. We didn't come up with this data set on our own. It's a decade of Fannie Mae data. The gains are real, replicable, and meaningful. It's time to adopt VantageScore 4 as the standard for mortgage credit risk. It delivers stronger performance, broader access, and a safer system for the future. And as always, we're here. At the end of the presentation, there are QR codes for how we can help you with next steps during your score migration process. If you have any questions related to our findings, we're always available, myself and the team. We're around. So this concludes my portion of the fact check. Thank you for taking the time to listen. And I know we have some time left. I'm happy to take questions. I'll turn it to Dan and the chat.
Ben, thank you. That's great. And now I get to do the only job I ever really wanted, which is game show host. We got some really good questions that came in Q&A. And so I've decided that this is Statistics Jeopardy. We're going to go from relatively easy, I think, to relatively, at least to me, harder. And so we're going to just dive right in, Ben. I'm going to combine a couple of the questions and say, which version of FICO did you use for this comparison and why? Why that version?
Sure. So this was, all we know is that it's Classic FICO. That was the score that was provided in the Fannie Mae loan level data set. The disclosures don't indicate exactly which score. So I would defer you to the glossary and references there. I can dig in and look, and if I find a slightly different answer, I'll pass it along. So unfortunately, I'm a little less helpful there.
Got it.
Dan, you have a leg up on me. I have not been monitoring the chat. So
no, that's right. It's okay.
These are surprises.
We got a few that have come in, and so let's see. What here we're gonna this is like what, the $400 level, I think. You don't actually get any money, sorry, at the end of this. I mean, you can get more candy like from the reception area or whatever, but I think the money Jeopardy isn't going to happen. What fraction of the incremental defaults identified are in the population not scorable by Classic FICO, but scored by VantageScore 4?
So another great question. And to your point, Dan, I'll get Starburst as my reward after this.
Nice.
Because these are funded loans from Fannie Mae, we don't have that newly scorable population here, unfortunately. These are all those who are canonically, classically able to be scored by Classic FICO because they've been acquired by Fannie Mae. So I wish we had that data. If we had access to what we call a reject analysis, we could see both those who were sent for approval to a GSE, but didn't qualify for whatever reason and can do inference there. But that data set is not available.
One question is, will these slides be available to attendees? Absolutely, they will be, as well as the recording, and you all will get that afterwards. So also don't hesitate to ask other questions even afterwards. So I'll answer that one. I'm not taking them in the order that they went in because we're going from easy to hard, or at least I'm trying. And so I'm going to go to the next one that I think is maybe a $400 level as well. What type of fair lending testing has been performed on VantageScore 4.0?
Well, I can't speak to the exact specifics, but I can say that we've had an independent company come and do a fair lending test on VantageScore 4. We did pass with flying colors.
Okay. So that
I'm
sounds
not
like
sure what's publicly available, what's external. I'm not the guy for that one, unfortunately.
okay. Well, this one, and you can tell me whether this is really the hardest one, but what's that? Is it $800 or is it $1,000 on Jeopardy? That's the highest level. Anyway, did you exclude records at T0 times 0, I assume, that did not have a valid FICO, but did have a valid Vantage score? And if you exclude records without a valid FICO, did you still observe the same performance lift?
Yes and yes. So kind of the elementary first step after joining all the data together was I wanted to do apples to apples as much as possible, which is what we did. So if you don't have a valid score, you're dropped from the data set. So that entire record is dropped. That's what these performance numbers are on. If you include those who are missing Classic FICO score, the results skew a little bit because the math kind of doesn't really resolve nicely on those. So we're only looking at those who have valid VantageScore 4 and Classic FICO scores here.
Okay, and let's do a last question, and then we're just going to dive into kind of some final next steps that I can handle. But last one here is, are there any trade line exclusions applied on VantageScore 4.0, things like child support, disputes, etc.?
The trade line exclusion I can speak to is medical collections. That is not included in VantageScore 4. For other trade lines that you're wondering about, I'd refer you to our user guide. And if you have more specific questions, on the next slide will be the QR codes. You can reach out there. I don't want to say anything apart from medical collections are excluded.
Okay, great. Look, those are we've got 7 questions from the group. That's terrific. Again, don't hesitate to send more in if you have them. Let's just jump to the last slide, and I want to just do some closing housekeeping, and then we will land the plane here on time. We've got 3 QR codes here, as you can see from top to bottom. The first one is we really encourage you, if you have further questions or if we can help with next steps, just scan the QR code to schedule a meeting with VantageScore subject matter experts, whether it's Ben or somebody else. We'll get you to the right person. Number 2, there's the VantageScore Mortgage Resource Center, as you can see in the middle, and that just has a growing library of resources to help people, from things like the mortgage migration playbook to just a mortgage FAQ. Many of your questions will be answered there. And then, of course, I would encourage you to follow VantageScore on LinkedIn. Things like videos of appearances on CNBC and news releases. Ben made mention of a white paper that he and others have written in this space. Those kinds of things, too, of course, are available there. It's the easiest way to keep up with what's going on at VantageScore. So I want to thank the whole group for joining us today. Look forward to following up with you on this. We look forward to seeing you again on webinars in the future as we continue to follow this topic. And Ben, thanks for just a terrific expertise and explanation today of this pretty technical field. Thanks to everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you.